Now, the first time I ever foraged for wild mint, I was shocked by how familiar the scent and taste were. It was, admittedly, a strange experience to be in the middle of a glade, nary a sign of civilization in sight, and then to suddenly stumble into a cloud of peppermint candy stick and mouthwash. At first, it was a jarring mental jolt back to the city where the memory had its roots. But as I knelt and wandered over the petite, pungent leaves of some American Pennyroyal, I realized it was exactly the opposite. As far from nature as the city can sometimes be, it's unknowingly awash with the olfactory memory of wild plants grown under unblemished blue country skies. There was something strangely beautiful about that. I should preface that I'm using the word mint quite broadly in this article, maybe too broadly for a botanist's liking, but just right for a forager bent on gathering some aromatic herbs. When I use the word, I'll be discussing a surprisingly large group of plants gathered under the Lamiaceae family, instead of just a single species. Most of these plants share a notable set of traits that distinguish them as part of that mint family. In fact, this combination of features is a good way to get a shaky identification of a plant in a field, though they will not give you a surefire identification that you should trust alone. Now, they have a squared stalk, they have simple, opposite leaves, and there's an aromatic smell, particularly when a leaf is crushed. Now, anyone who grows their own herbs will immediately recognize that set of identifiers. The mint family is far larger than you might realize. Many of our beloved culinary herbs such as oregano, lemon balm, thyme, rosemary, lavender, and marjoram are all under that huge Lamiaceae family umbrella. Mint and their kin are surprisingly ubiquitous. Of course, they're cultivated in gardens, but since humans had valued these piquant, low-growing herbs for so long, they've become naturalized in many states. Sometimes you can discover the traces of an old homestead by finding peppermint, spearmint, or lemon balm growing seemingly in the wild. In reality, they're the remnants of a garden long forgotten. I bet if you look around that area, you'll likely find some sign of previous habitation close by. Now, this article will feature 3 types of wild mints that can be found in the Ozarks, but there are plenty more that might be local to you. So as we explore the following few species, keep in mind that this is a very incomplete list. Hopefully, that's an exciting fact for you. You'll have to get out there and discover which plants are in your own location, just waiting to be discovered and enjoyed. American Pennyroyal. Now, this is an unusual member of the mint family. American Pennyroyal is an annual rather than a perennial like the rest of them. It produces tiny leaves on woody branches that are rarely over a foot tall, and it bears tiny, simple leaves and an even tinier pale flower. But what this plant lacks in mass, it more than makes up for in aroma. It's the mintiest mint I've ever laid nose on. As with all mints, it has distinctively squared stems and opposite leaves. Pennyroyal can be found alongside other plants that favor dry grasslands such as black-eyed Susan, wild bergamot, and goldenrod. It often grows in areas colonized by oaks and hickories and among rocks and gravel. It's most active in the late summer, perfume in the air to the chorus of cicada song. Now, dabblers in herbal medicine might be turned off to this mint because of some warnings about toxicity that's often listed in medicinal books. The issue concerns an aromatic oil called pouligone, found in American Pennyroyal and others for the record. Taken in the hyper-concentrated essential oil form, pouligone is toxic and has led to several poisonings when misguided folks took large doses of it. But no one should ever take a large dose of any essential oil, and pennyroyal found in the field isn't an essential oil. Consuming the natural plant as a tea or a seasoning will not give you anywhere close to the amount of pouligone that could cause an issue, and there are no records of anyone being poisoned from normal consumption. The cautions against this mint are moot for the forager and only serve to demonize a perfectly good plant. Wild bergamot. Sometimes also called horse mint, this butterfly and bumblebee magnet of a wildflower is one of my favorite sights in spring. As with many wild mint family plants, you can find the new spring sprouts of this perennial growing up underneath the dried out seed heads from last year. In the case of wild bergamot, these seed heads are round balls held about a foot or so off the ground. Wild bergamot can typically be found in the same company as ox-eyed daisy, black-eyed Susan, and Queen Anne's lace. Sunny, open fields and glades are ideal places to hunt for these spring blooming beauties. When they first emerge from the ground in April, the leaves are beautifully dark green on the top and surprisingly purple on the underside. Being a mint, you know they've got those squared stems and opposite leaves. In the late spring, they bear spotted white or pale lavender blossoms that grow in a ring like a ragged, big-centered daisy. Whenever the sun warms their leaves, the surrounding area is filled with their fragrance, and true to the name, the smell and taste are somewhat reminiscent of Earl Grey tea. If you can't find wild bergamot, your land might be home to any of its close siblings, such as the pink-flowered wild bergamot, which is actually a different plant, common bee balm, or the spotted bee balm. Their use is pretty much interchangeable among all the Monarda genus, as they are all very agreeable. Dittany. Also called wild oregano, Dittany grows in round, wiry shrubs that colonize dry, acidic slopes. You'll often find it on the borders of forests or in the shaded areas by trodden paths. As with the plants in the Monarda genus, you can find the new shoots of this perennial beneath the seed heads from the previous years. It grows once spring really takes hold, becoming lush and green around May. The finely toothed leaves are a glossy dark green when mature and grow opposite of each other on those squared stems. The delicate, delightfully purple blossoms emerge in full force in September. The heady aroma of a woodland slope colonized with bunches of Dittany is one of those private delights of the forager who knows to look for it. Serenaded by wood thrushes and warmed by the early fall sun, I can think of few locations more pleasant. Now in my area, Dittany is famous for being a source of frost flowers in the fall. Around the first hard frost, water gets squeezed out of cracks in the stem and instantly freezes, forming delicately bizarre arcs of ribbon-like ice. Now that's just a sampling of the mint-related herbs there are to be found out there, but it's probably a long enough list to start. In your own area, you might find plenty of other wonderful wild mints, including beefsteak plant, slender mountain mint, water mint, and wild mint itself. Mint can be found everywhere, and their ubiquity is a delight for foragers the country over. Now let's talk about harvesting wild mint. Aromatic plants like these are at their peak in the morning after the dew has dried from their leaves. When harvesting, you don't have to just pluck leaves either. The whole plant is aromatic and useful, from the flowers to the leaves to the stems. Now that said, all mints are pollinator magnets, so if you cut down the whole plant, you'll be removing an excellent source of nectar from them. I hardly recommend harvesting only 1/3 of any given stand, allowing the plants to finish their life cycles, make seeds, and feed the other creatures that share your land. And frankly, the sight of flowers can be food for the soul when you don't take it all for your stomach. You can use mint fresh, of course, but the season for fresh herbs is brief. To preserve them, arrange them in a single layer over a dry, airy space as soon as you can. A covered porch, a solar dehydrator, or an airy hallway are all great locations. You'll know they're completely dry when the leaves crisply fracture apart when crunched. If desired, you can strip the leaves from stems and store them separately, or you can just snip the stems into short segments so they don't get in the way. You can then store your dried mint leaves in mason jars for the winter just like you would any other herb. Now let's talk about cooking and using wild mint. Strong flavored and pungent, they're best used like any other herb, sparingly as a flavoring. But that said, both Dittany and wild bergamot leaves can be used in place of oregano on a pizza or in pasta. They're very pleasant tea as well. Hot or iced preparations will give you slightly different flavors, so make it any way you want. The potent smell of pennyroyal may be pleasant for us, but it is a turn-off to annoying pests like mosquitoes and ticks. So when I pass the many patches of pennyroyal by my barn, I brush my hand along the tops of the herbs and spread the aromatic oil all over my arms and neck. Pennyroyal retains its flavor and aroma wonderfully when dried, making it one of my favorite teas to brew and sip with a bit of honey. But for an extra special midwinter treat, place a tablespoon of pennyroyal leaves and stems in half a cup of water and bring it to a boil. Turn off the heat and allow it to steep for 5 minutes. Then after straining out the leaves, mix 2 teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of cocoa powder, a dash of salt, 1.5 cups of milk, and half a teaspoon of vanilla into the pot. Warm it to drinking temperature and you have an absolutely decadent mint hot chocolate to sip as you warm your toes by the wood stove. With an easy to identify nature, their persistence through spring, summer, and fall, their unmistakable smell, and their pleasant range of flavors, mint might be one of the most beginner-friendly plants to forage. I wish more people knew the wild mint varieties, and rather than saying that these wild plants remind them of chewing gum or toothpaste, instead think that chewing gum and toothpaste remind them of the real plants growing in their wild, uninhibited sprawl outdoors. So keep your eyes open and your nose to the breeze. Come springtime, mint will be inviting you back to the fields and forests.